Arben Krasnecki arrived in Liverpool with nothing but a small bag and a calm expression that never changed. And within a few years, the city's loudest gangs began to disappear without a single public fight. Besnik Hoxha walked the same streets every day as an ordinary worker. Yet every step he took was mapped to routes that would later move millions in silent money. Alir Dema never raised his voice, never showed his power, but entire neighborhoods shifted ownership because of decisions he made in complete silence. Ankola lived in shared flats and rode public buses, while an invisible network spread across docks, streets, and businesses under his control. By the time Liverpool noticed something was wrong, these names were already woven into the city's darkest corners, proving that the most dangerous men are not the ones you see, but the ones you never notice at all. In the early 2000s, Liverpool's streets hummed with life and quiet change. The city was shedding its old industrial skin, turning warehouses into apartments and breathing new energy into neglected neighborhoods. Among the bustling streets and harborside renovations, a group of young men arrived from Albania. They came quietly, blending with the migrant communities already scattered across the city. No one noticed them at first. They moved with careful observation, avoiding the attention of local authorities and gang members alike. Their lives seemed ordinary. They worked in low-paying jobs at warehouses, construction sites, and small delivery businesses. On the surface, they were just another group of migrants seeking stability, survival, and opportunity in a foreign city. But beneath this ordinary facade, they were studying the city in ways no one suspected. Liverpool had a reputation for gang activity, but most violence was loud and visible. Rival gangs fought over territory with clear rules, bold threats, and frequent public displays of aggression. The Albanians, however, acted differently. They watched, listened, and memorized the rhythms of the city. Every street corner, alleyway, and abandoned warehouse was catalogued. They noted which gangs controlled which neighborhoods, the habits of local police, the routes used for illegal trades, and even the patterns of ordinary citizens. Patience became their strategy. Unlike other gangs who sought immediate power through force, these newcomers understood the value of timing and observation. Their arrival coincided with a period when Liverpool's economy was recovering but unevenly. Old docks had been transformed into luxury flats, while poorer districts struggled with unemployment. Many of the city's established criminal groups were distracted by infighting and territorial disputes. They did not notice the Albanians moving quietly into low-profile roles, taking jobs that seemed insignificant but gave them access to local knowledge, networks, and cash flow. Some of the men rented tiny apartments in blocks that were on the verge of decay, paying rent in cash and keeping to themselves. Their neighbors often considered them hardworking and respectful. No one suspected that these quiet tenants were learning the city's undercurrents with the precision of seasoned strategists. The police had little reason to pay attention at first. Minor offenses were all that appeared in reports, occasional traffic violations, petty theft, or workplace disputes. There were no violent crimes, no open confrontations, no signs of a growing threat. Liverpool continued to buzz around them, unaware that a different kind of power was beginning to take root. The city had seen gangs come and go, but nothing like this, nothing so methodical, so patient, and so calculated. By the time the Albanians began to assert influence, they had already mapped the city's vulnerabilities. Every overlooked street, every weak connection in existing criminal networks, and every corruptible or cooperative individual had been noted. Their silent arrival was more dangerous than an open invasion because no one could measure it. Liverpool's old gangs still fought with fire and noise, believing that strength was shown in aggression. Meanwhile, the Albanians proved that silence, observation, and patience could be far more powerful weapons. Their story was just beginning, but even in these early years, it was clear that the city's underworld was about to change forever. By the mid-2000s, the Albanians were no longer just newcomers blending into Liverpool's neighborhoods. They had begun to build a network that operated in plain sight yet remained completely invisible to the authorities. Small businesses, car washes, delivery services, construction firms, and corner shops served as their foundation. On the surface, these enterprises appeared legitimate, providing jobs and services like any other company. Behind closed doors, however, they formed a tightly controlled system that funneled money, information, and resources across the city. Each business had a purpose beyond profit. A car wash might be a front for laundering cash. A delivery service could transport packages that no one was meant to examine. Even the smallest repair shop was a node in a growing web of influence. The network's strength lay in its ability to remain invisible. Unlike traditional gangs, there were no visible symbols of allegiance, no loud threats, and no territorial graffiti marking their control. Violence was carefully calculated and rare. When a problem arose, it was handled quietly and efficiently. A rival who resisted cooperation might disappear for a few days, only for the issue to resolve without leaving evidence behind. This created an aura of unpredictability and fear. People didn't know when the Albanians would act, but they understood that resistance came at a price. Local criminals began to respect this subtle power, realizing that it was more effective than brazen aggression. Drugs became a critical part of their operation, but the methods were unconventional. Instead of the chaotic street dealing that characterized other gangs, shipments moved through discreet channels. Hidden compartments in vans, private docks, and carefully monitored delivery routes kept the supply chain almost invisible. Police reports rarely mentioned these operations because the transactions left almost no trace. There were no street stings, no public deals, no flashy displays. The system worked like clockwork, with each person playing a specific role, often without knowing the full picture. This compartmentalization made it nearly impossible to dismantle the network through conventional investigation. Communication was another layer of sophistication. Instead of open phone lines or easily traceable messages, the Albanians relied on coded notes, burner phones, and indirect channels. Information moved precisely from person to person, creating a chain of control that could adapt and survive even arrests or sudden losses. Their operations were not dependent on a single individual, but functioned as a resilient system, designed to withstand disruptions. The Albanian network extended beyond Liverpool. Connections with other European cities allowed money to flow seamlessly across borders. Property investments, cash businesses, and online enterprises helped launder funds while also increasing influence in legitimate industries. Some profits even found their way into clubs, bars, and local entertainment venues, giving the appearance of integration with the city rather than domination. Despite their growth, the Albanians remained hidden in plain sight. Residents continued to see them as hardworking migrants. Officers noted no alarming spike in violence, and rival gangs underestimated their influence. By the time authorities started noticing patterns, the Albanians had already embedded themselves deeply into the city's economic and criminal structures. They were everywhere yet nowhere, a shadow presence that grew steadily, silently reshaping Liverpool's underworld while the city carried on unaware. As the years passed, Liverpool's old criminal order began to crumble without anyone realizing why. The city's traditional gangs, long accustomed to asserting dominance through intimidation and violence, started to lose control over territories and operations. Supply lines that once seemed secure suddenly dried up. Trusted contacts stopped answering calls, and businesses that had once paid protection money quietly switched hands. At first, the decline appeared random, an unfortunate series of coincidences or poor management. But the truth was far more calculated. The Albanian groups had infiltrated the city's underworld methodically, replacing old structures with their own silent system of control. The Albanians did not announce their takeover. There were no street battles, no public executions, no dramatic displays of power that drew attention. Their methods were precise, almost surgical. They bought loyalty through consistent financial reward, offering reliable profits where chaos had once ruled. Those who resisted or betrayed them faced consequences that were swift, discreet, and impossible to trace. Entire neighborhoods shifted under this invisible influence. Clubs, bars, and small businesses once dominated by local gangs suddenly had new management. Rival leaders, bewildered by the sudden changes, tried to respond with traditional force, only to find their attacks ineffective. The Albanians never confronted them openly. Instead, they cut off resources, diverted attention, and quietly absorbed the weaker factions. This subtle domination created confusion and fear. Local gang members could not comprehend a threat that made no noise. Violence had always been the language of the underworld in Liverpool, and the Albanians spoke a different tongue entirely. The old bosses had relied on fear visible to the public, a show of force meant to intimidate, but the Albanians understood that true control came from consistency and unpredictability combined. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the city's criminal hierarchy had already shifted dramatically. One of the most striking aspects of this rise was its invisibility. There were no news stories about traumatic turf wars or bloody confrontations. The Albanians moved quietly, using businesses, property, and cash-based ventures to secure influence. Every decision, every transaction, reinforced their dominance while leaving almost no evidence for law enforcement. They had learned from the mistakes of other gangs. Visibility meant vulnerability. By remaining hidden, they could operate without provoking retaliation or scrutiny. As the Albanians consolidated power, their influence extended into areas previously untouched by organized crime. They controlled small-scale drug distribution, ensured loyalty among street-level operators, and even influenced legitimate industries through indirect investment. Their presence became felt in every corner of Liverpool's underworld without ever being openly acknowledged. Rival gangs who had once mocked or underestimated them were now cautious, aware that any misstep could lead to losses they could not recover from. The transformation was complete before anyone fully understood it. Liverpool's streets looked the same, its nightclubs and pubs continued to bustle, and the city's residents went about their lives. Yet beneath the surface, an invisible order had replaced chaos. The Albanian Mafia had succeeded not through spectacle, but through patience, strategy, and the careful erosion of old powers. By taking control quietly and methodically, they reshaped the city's underworld, proving that sometimes the most dangerous power is the one that no one sees coming. By the time the Albanian Mafia had established a firm grip on Liverpool's underworld, their true power was no longer measured by violence or fear, but by the control of money. Unlike other gangs, whose influence was often visible through territorial battles or flashy displays of force, the Albanians built a system where financial dominance became the ultimate weapon. Every operation, legal or illegal, was designed to feed into this network, creating a flow of cash that was nearly impossible to trace. Their money was not just for wealth. It was a tool of control, manipulation, and influence, giving them a power that few outside their circle could understand. Property investments became one of their most effective methods. The early 2000s saw a housing boom in Liverpool, and the Albanians exploited it expertly. Abandoned buildings, derelict warehouses, and neglected apartment blocks were quietly purchased, often through shell companies or hidden associates. Once under their control, these properties were renovated and sold, sometimes multiple times, with each transaction laundering more money into the system. In one neighborhood, investigators later discovered that a single street had changed ownership 5 times in just 2 years, each time moving funds through untraceable channels. To outsiders, it appeared as legitimate business activity, but in reality, it was a sophisticated financial network designed to secure both profit and power. Cash businesses formed another layer of their financial empire. Car washes, corner shops, and delivery services not only provided cover for laundering money, but also created an appearance of integration with the local community. They offered employment to both Albanians and locals, maintaining the illusion of ordinary business activity while generating enormous untraceable income. Profits were split, moved, and reinvested in ways that kept the true scale of the operation hidden. Banks and authorities could only follow fragments of the money, never enough to connect it to the larger system. The drug trade remained a significant revenue stream, but it was carefully structured to avoid detection. Instead of chaotic street dealing, shipments were precise, timed, and discreet. Hidden compartments in vehicles, private docks, and trusted intermediaries ensured that the flow of narcotics moved without drawing attention. Unlike other gangs, the Albanians did not rely on fear of violence to maintain control. Their money ensured loyalty. Dealers and lower-level operatives knew that cooperating brought steady income, while betrayal meant sudden financial ruin or disappearance. International connections amplified their financial reach. Links to other European countries allowed funds to be transferred, cleaned, and reinvested across borders. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and online businesses became part of an intricate web that spanned the continent. No single arrest or seizure could stop the network. Even when small players were caught, the system adapted, demonstrating a level of resilience that baffled investigators. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their financial power was how invisible it remained. To the average citizen, these were just ordinary businesses in quiet neighborhoods. To authorities, the network left almost no trace. Every transaction, every property deal, and every investment was carefully designed to appear legitimate. The Albanians had proven that in the modern underworld, money, not violence, was the most effective form of control. Through financial dominance, they had secured their place in Liverpool, reshaping the city's criminal landscape without ever needing to fire a gun. Their empire was silent, hidden, and terrifyingly effective, proving that the most powerful crimes often leave the smallest footprints. The first real crack in the Albanian Mafia's armor came unexpectedly, in a way that seemed almost ordinary at the time. It began with a routine traffic stop on a quiet street in Liverpool's outskirts. Officers pulled over a van for a minor violation, expecting nothing more than a simple citation. Inside, however, they discovered something unusual: a series of coded notes, cash in unmarked bundles, and a phone that contained no contacts, only a string of mysterious numbers. At first, the items seemed confusing and isolated, but they marked the beginning of a trail that investigators would follow for months. The stop revealed the precision of the network and hinted at a system far larger than anyone had imagined. As authorities examined the phone and notes, patterns began to emerge. The numbers led to other devices, which in turn connected to vans, businesses, and warehouses across Liverpool. Small clues, each seemingly insignificant, painted a larger picture. It became clear that the Albanian network had a communication system built on secrecy and compartmentalization. Information moved from one trusted member to another, with no single person having access to the full operation. Each participant was trained to follow instructions carefully and avoid unnecessary exposure. This method had allowed the Mafia to operate undetected for years, and it was exactly this structure that now gave police the first opportunity to penetrate their organization. The raids that followed were targeted but limited in scope. Authorities managed to arrest a few low-level operatives, uncovering minor drug shipments and some cash flow. While these arrests made headlines, they barely touched the core of the organization. The main leaders remained invisible, their movements precise, their identity obscured, and their influence undiminished. Each raid seemed to reinforce the network's adaptability. When one route was disrupted, another seamlessly took its place. When one member was arrested, others stepped in without hesitation. The Albanian system was resilient, designed to survive scrutiny, and it had already anticipated these types of interruptions. Then came an unexpected break from abroad. A coordinated, European operation targeting financial crimes in a neighboring country revealed a money trail leading directly to Liverpool. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and property investments were linked to the same Albanian network that had quietly controlled the city for years. Suddenly, investigators could see connections that had previously been invisible. The scale of the operation was staggering, revealing that Liverpool was not an isolated hub, but part of a larger continental system. Money, drugs, and influence moved with precision across borders, all coordinated without leaving obvious traces in public view. Despite these breakthroughs, the most frustrating aspect for law enforcement remained the lack of a central figure. Arrests yielded information, but every lead seemed to fracture, leading to more questions than answers. The network's compartmentalized structure ensured that even captured members could not expose the entire operation. The Albanian Mafia had built an empire where trust, silence, and meticulous planning protected the core from exposure. Liverpool's authorities realized that traditional policing methods were ill-equipped for this challenge. The city's underworld had evolved, and any attempts to dismantle it required patience, coordination, and international cooperation. The first crack in the armor had been made, but it was only the beginning of a long and complicated struggle. The investigation revealed one undeniable truth: the Albanian Mafia's power was not just in their violence or money. It was in their intelligence, their planning, and their ability to remain almost invisible until the right moment. As investigations progressed, authorities expected to find a powerful, ostentatious leader controlling the Albanian Mafia from a luxurious residence. Instead, what they discovered was startlingly different. The figure at the heart of the operation was almost invisible, living in modest accommodations, moving constantly, and leaving almost no trace in the digital or financial world. There were no flashy cars, no lavish parties, no obvious displays of wealth. His power did not rely on intimidation alone, nor did it come from fearsome reputation on the streets. It came from something far more effective: organization, trust, and control over a system that could function independently of any single person. This hidden leadership was the core of the Mafia's resilience. The network had been designed to survive disruption. When one member disappeared or was arrested, others stepped in without hesitation, continuing operations seamlessly. Orders were transmitted through intermediaries, and information flowed in coded, compartmentalized ways that left investigators tracing fragments rather than the full picture. Even when authorities identified parts of the network, the structure adapted. No single arrest could dismantle the empire because the system itself was stronger than any individual. Investigators were shocked to realize that the Albanian Mafia's leadership was not just hidden, it was almost untouchable. The leader's identity could be traced only through patterns, movements, and indirect links. Phones, vehicles, and properties led to dead ends. Attempts to infiltrate the inner circle with informants proved nearly impossible because trust within the network was earned slowly and rigorously tested. Members who were new to the operation were often isolated from sensitive information, ensuring that betrayal or carelessness could never compromise the entire system. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of this hidden leadership was its adaptability. The Albanian Mafia did not rely on fear to maintain power, as other gangs often did. It relied on consistency, rewards, and precision. Loyalty was earned and maintained through financial security, protection, and the understanding that the system worked for those who cooperated. Betrayal or incompetence resulted in consequences that were swift, calculated, and invisible, often financial ruin, disappearance, or reassignment without warning. This method ensured that control extended far beyond what brute force could achieve. Even when the first leader vanished from the city, the network did not collapse. Another figure stepped in almost immediately, maintaining operations and proving that leadership was not centralized but distributed. The system itself was the power. This realization left authorities stunned. They had been trained to track hierarchies, identify a kingpin, and dismantle organizations from the top down. The Albanian Mafia had rendered this approach ineffective. Control was embedded in the operation itself, not the individuals who temporarily held authority. By the end of these investigations, it became clear that the most dangerous element of the Albanian Mafia was not its violence, drugs, or even money. It was its leadership model. Invisible, adaptive, and system-based, it could survive arrests, raids, and financial scrutiny. It demonstrated a level of sophistication rarely seen in organized crime, where patience, planning, and intelligence outweighed brute force. Liverpool's streets had been reshaped, not by a single figure, but by a network that refused to be disrupted, proving that sometimes the most powerful control is the one that no one sees, yet everyone feels. As the Albanian Mafia's presence became more visible to law enforcement, Liverpool's authorities realized that traditional policing methods were inadequate for dismantling such a sophisticated network. Joint operations were planned with precision, targeting known financial channels, suspicious properties, and suspected transit routes for illicit goods. Surveillance intensified, with officers tracking vehicles, monitoring businesses, and attempting to map the network's complex web of operations. For the first time, the authorities began to feel that they could challenge the Mafia's dominance, though success would come slowly and at great effort. The pressure on the network began to show cracks. Some lower-level members fled the city, sensing the increasing risk of exposure. Others, fearful of arrests or betrayal, started cooperating with investigators, offering information about shipment schedules, hidden cash, and coded communications. Even small revelations were significant because they provided insight into the structure that had remained so elusive for years. Investigators began connecting dots that had seemed unrelated before. Shell companies, property transfers, and offshore accounts now formed a coherent pattern. It became apparent that while the Albanian Mafia had been remarkably resilient, it was not invincible. Financial operations, once the backbone of their power, also faced disruption. Authorities froze accounts, seized properties, and tracked suspicious investments. Some businesses were closed temporarily, creating pressure points within the organization. The Mafia system, while designed to absorb shocks, was not immune to cumulative stress. Even their careful compartmentalization could not prevent the impact of coordinated efforts targeting multiple layers simultaneously. Each seizure, each investigation, forced adaptations, revealing vulnerabilities that had previously been hidden. Despite these setbacks, the Albanian Mafia's influence remained deeply rooted. They had reshaped Liverpool's criminal landscape so thoroughly that even weakened, their methods persisted. Younger recruits continued to emulate the network's structure, learning patience, secrecy, and strategic thinking. Rival gangs, once loud and brash, had begun to adopt elements of the same silent, disciplined approach. Liverpool's Underworld had changed permanently, and the legacy of the Albanian model extended beyond the immediate arrests and seizures. The city itself responded as well. Public awareness campaigns, improved intelligence sharing, and stronger regulatory oversight created an environment that made it harder for illicit operations to flourish. Communities began reporting suspicious activities, and local businesses became more cautious about associations. Gradually, the streets that had once been dominated by invisible power felt safer, though the scars of control were still present in subtle ways. Ultimately, the pushback demonstrated both the resilience of law enforcement and the adaptability of the Mafia. The struggle was not over, but it showed that even highly sophisticated criminal organizations could be challenged. By targeting money flows, disrupting networks, and applying consistent pressure, authorities could limit influence and extract cooperation from lower-level operatives. Liverpool's Underworld, however, had already been reshaped. The Albanian Mafia had introduced a new standard for crime: silent, disciplined, and strategically organized. Even as operations slowed and members were arrested, the lessons of their rise continued to influence the city's criminal ecosystem. The pushback revealed vulnerabilities, but it also highlighted a sobering reality. Dismantling a network built on patience, secrecy, and adaptability required more than raids. It required understanding a system designed to survive disruption. In many ways, the streets of Liverpool had been forever changed, and the echoes of that silent empire would linger for years to come. Even as Liverpool's streets began to regain a sense of normalcy, the shadow of the Albanian Mafia remained. Cafes were busy, nightlife thrived, and the city's harbor gleamed in the evening light. Yet beneath this surface, the influence of the silent empire lingered. The arrests, seizures, and raids had weakened the organization, but they had not erased it. The Mafia had already reshaped the city's underworld, leaving behind structures, methods, and behaviors that could survive without direct oversight. Their approach had been so meticulous and patient that even in retreat, the network's lessons were embedded in Liverpool's criminal DNA. The most chilling realization for authorities was that the Albanian Mafia had taught the city's underworld a new way to operate. Their success had not relied solely on violence or fear. It relied on planning, patience, and invisibility. Lower-level operatives, former members, and even rivals had observed the efficiency of the system. Young criminals learned that quiet control, financial precision, and strategic patience could achieve what open confrontation never could. Even when the original leaders were gone, their methods persisted. In neighborhoods where the Mafia had once been strongest, new operators began to mimic the disciplined, invisible strategies, proving that the organization's influence extended beyond its members. Property remained one of the most enduring legacies. Buildings that had been used to launder money were now legitimate businesses, but the ownership structures still contained hidden layers of control. Investments in bars, shops, and online enterprises continued to move quietly, generating revenue and influence with minimal visibility. In some cases, authorities discovered that these properties had changed hands multiple times, echoing the methods that had made the Mafia so difficult to track. This meant that even when the system appeared dismantled, its financial roots continued to influence the city, demonstrating that power can persist long after public battles end. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Albanian Mafia's legacy was its demonstration of adaptability. Even after arrests and international pressure, the organization had shown that leadership could be replaced, strategies could evolve, and operations could continue under new direction. The city had experienced the quiet takeover of its underworld, and the memory of that transformation served as a reminder of how vulnerable urban centers could be to organized, patient criminal forces. Liverpool's authorities had achieved victories, but they had also learned a sobering truth. The most dangerous power is not always visible, and the most enduring influence can be silent. For the residents of Liverpool, life went on as usual. Children played in parks, commuters moved through the streets, and businesses thrived. Yet in the back alleys, abandoned warehouses, and quiet corners of the city, the invisible imprint of the Albanian Mafia remained. It was a network that had once controlled a city without being seen, proving that organized crime could be both invisible and omnipresent. The story of Liverpool's dark streets is not one of dramatic battles or explosive violence, but of patience, strategy, and invisible control. It serves as a warning that power does not always need to announce itself, and that the most effective criminal empires are often those that remain in the shadows. Even as the city moves forward, the lessons of the Albanian Mafia linger, a silent reminder that some shadows are never fully gone, and some control is impossible to erase completely.